Hi, welcome to Minutes with Mickey, a time for us to wonder about the story of Joash as he is king of Judah. The story that's been told that you've listened to is a combination of 2 Kings chapter 12 and 2 Chronicles chapter 24, as it puts all the pieces of this particular story of Joash as king of Judah together. Please go back and read both of those chapters, for there is a lot of wonderful information in each of those chapters that helps to flesh out or to fill in this story in great richness. So I would really challenge you to go back into the text. When I first read this story and listened to it, I couldn't help but be overcome by tears, as I thought about how much there is in this story that is really salient and speaks to our culture today. What is going on in our world politically and socially that God would not be pleased with in the same way that God is not pleased with what happened in Judah? So I have several questions that I'd like us to look at and sort of hopefully challenge you to go into the text to process some of these things, and maybe you'll see it the same way I do. But I was overcome, and it was hard for me then to even think about anything other than how do we just preach this text? How do we get the word out? Please stop disobeying the Lord. Please don't let what happened to Israel and Judah happen to us. And yet I feel that we're very close to having that be the case. So here's what I see. What is this text? What is this story telling us about the need for lifelong obedience to God? We see that Jehoiada, as the priest, had that lifelong obedience. God was pleased with him, and he was even able to be buried in the special place alongside the kings. Joash, who was a baby when he was rescued from his grandmother's killing spree, Athaliah, grew up under Jehoiada's training. And so it says in the text, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord as long as Jehoiada lived. Wow. I don't want my children to only walk with the Lord as long as I live. I want them to walk with the Lord as long as they live. And that is the key task, I think, of all of us, is that we want to be able to pass our faith on to the next generation so that they walk with the Lord as long as they live, not just as long as someone around them is protecting them and keeping them straight on the path. It speaks to who do we listen to, because we see that while he was walking with the Lord, he did wonderful and good things. One of the right things, of course, was to repair the temple. And so what does this story tell us about a couple of things about the need that we have as human beings for going to a place together in order to worship? The people began to return to the Lord as they went back to the temple and worshiped the Lord on a regular basis. It says something here about our need for being together as a community of faith and sharing in those things that we love, whether it's the hymns of the faith or whether it's communion, whatever it is that we put in. And what does this story speak to then loudly? After Jehoiada died, and Joash listened to other counsel, the ways of the world, and then the ways of the world began to infiltrate into the temple itself again, with worshiping other gods and sex goddesses even. And then what does it say about even for us not following the Lord, that we would do things that would be so contrary to God? Joash himself was even so influenced that he was even willing to put the next priest to death. What does this story tell us about the need for people to speak the truth even though it's painful? Jehoiada's son saw what was going on and stood and said, "Do not leave the Lord, for he is going to leave you." The text actually in the scriptures is really, really clear in the 2 Chronicles passage. So well put, for it says this, the Spirit of God came to Zechariah, this is Jehoiada's son, came upon his son, the priest, and he stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper because you have forsaken the Lord. He has forsaken you." How many things then have we put in place in our churches, in our buildings? How much of the world have we brought in so that maybe we're on the verge of forsaking God himself and disobeying what God has told us to do? Let's be very careful about that. I couldn't help but just be overwhelmed with that thought. We need someone to speak the truth. What does this story speak to also about making sure that we put the right people in the right places of service? We need to make sure that we're giving the people who should be doing things based on their gifts and abilities. You don't give the priests who have certain skills the responsibility to repair the temple. They don't have those skills. You give building contractors this opportunity to do that, and you pay them. But it also says something about looking for people of integrity. Does this text tell us that the priests didn't have integrity, or was it just saying that we've given the wrong people the wrong tasks and so the job wasn't getting done? What about this piece, this text is telling us also about the value of giving to the Lord out of what we should be giving in order for the work to be done? And it does say here that it was a tax. It never says it wasn't a tax. But what's the difference between going and collecting a tax from the people and actually having the people give the tax themselves? What was the different attitude that sort of came up into that? People seemed to be more willing if they were giving it of themselves than if it was taken from them. As a matter of fact, they were even more generous because they had more to give and more to use as the time went by. Even after the temple was finished, they had money left over to do other things. So I think that's a really interesting concept. Speaking the truth, as Joash, as Jehoiada's son did. But here we have Joash being so influenced by the world around him that he was even willing to listen to those who didn't want to listen to God's word at all, and to kill Jehoiada's son, who must have been like a brother to him, falling that far from evil. We see that that's why these series of stories are called the path to captivity. Pulling away from God leads us to a path we are then captured. We have then become captured by the world, and it takes us away from God. This story speaks directly into what's going on into our world today, politically and socially, and into our churches. Who is going to stand for God and say, don't do these things. Don't become like the world. Follow God so that he will not leave you. As believers, we need to be the ones that stand firm in this and speak the truth. Do not forsake the Lord. Lifelong obedience. Wow. There's a lot that this story was speaking to me. What was it saying to you? And what do you hear God telling you? Have a great week.